Long story ahead. The events encompass several days. In 2019, my boyfriend, my best friend, her partner, and I stayed at an Airbnb in Sandusky, Ohio, for a convention. There were several red flags about the place, but it was much cheaper than the hotel near the convention hall, so we opted to stay here. The first red flag happened as soon as we all arrived. The owner greeted us and made a point to tell us that his house was directly next door, as in, if there weren't any trees, he would have been able to see into the windows of where we were staying. Okay, so he had a few houses on his property. No big deal, right? Wrong. It only got worse from there. Per his instruction, we were forbidden to go into the basement under any circumstance, unless there was a tornado. Being the curious young adults we are, we opened the door anyway, and were going to investigate, but we stopped in our tracks as soon as we saw the direction the stairs were facing, directly towards the owner's home. In the darkness, we could make out a faint electronic glow. We quickly shut the door and barricaded it with luggage. Again, the owner's home was so close, there could have easily been something connecting his house to this basement. A little weirded out at this point, we went and observed the rest of the house. It was a nice and spacious place, with a narrow staircase to the second floor where our bedrooms would be. We selected our rooms and began to unwind after the long drive there. In my boyfriend and I's room, we noticed that there was a single random sprinkler in the middle of the ceiling that looked very out of place. We were tired from the trip, so I didn't think much of it then, but looking back now, I think there's a very high chance it was actually a hidden camera. Things only got weirder from there. We were gone most of the next day at the convention, but when we returned, one of the outside doors that we had definitely locked was left open and slightly ajar. My friends and I collectively shared a look of panic and closed and locked the door right away. My best friend's partner suggested that maybe the owner had needed to get something out while we were gone and hadn't closed the door completely on the way out. We looked around and all made sure our things were still there. We soon forgot about it though, because we discovered something much more pressing. The locks on both the bedroom doors were now ineffective. We told ourselves they were already like that and we just hadn't noticed, but I'm not completely sure I believe that. On our second to last night, my boyfriend and I were both really restless over what had been happening at the Airbnb and the day's activities, so we decided to try and find something to watch on TV to take our minds off of it a little. As we were flipping through the random channels on the TV though, we suddenly came across a Windows 10 lock screen and no computer in sight. I opened the cabinets and looked around trying to find this mystery computer. The dresser the TV was on was too heavy to move to look behind, but seeing where the wires were positioned, they could have very well gone through the wall and into the basement. We were all too frightened to go to the basement and check for ourselves to confirm or deny our suspicions of surveillance and owner interference. Who knows what else? Needless to say, we left as quickly as possible the last day there, and we never looked back. Back in 2015, when I was in my second semester of college as a freshman, I had a habit of pacing around to keep my thoughts flowing. I had had this habit since childhood, and it often seemed that I couldn't stay focused on anything that required creative thought without it. Considering my intended major required literature and creative writing courses, it was something I found myself doing constantly, especially when I was trying to think up ideas for essays and narratives in assigned class. To be clear, my pacing isn't just walking. It needs to be done along a predictable short route so I can mentally clock out of reality and focus solely on my thoughts while I run on autopilot. I often put on headphones to prevent distractions that take me back into reality, because if that happens mid-thought pattern, I'd lose at least half of the ideas that I was exploring. Weird, I know, but I wanted to clarify this now. It was getting late one evening, and I had a lengthy essay due the day after the next. I had a good portion of it done already, but I still had a bit to go. My roommate had come back to the dorm, and considering the time, it was perfectly understandable that she just wanted to sleep. She generally didn't mind my pacing, but preferred that I didn't do it when she was trying to rest, and with her turning off the lights in the room, it would be a little difficult for me anyway. I still wanted to keep going on this assignment though, so I decided to find somewhere else on campus outside the room to pace, and figured I'd note down ideas in an app on my phone as needed for later. It turned out there was nowhere in the dorm complex that was suitable, so I started walking around. The university was well known for its large campus, so I figured I'd find a good place eventually. I walked for a bit until I found myself at one of the more historic buildings, which had a very nice courtyard in front of it. Part of this courtyard included wide pedestrian paths that meet in the center, as a nice roundabout with a fountain in the middle. Further from that was another small roundabout with a grass island in the center. Circular paths like this are ideal for pacing because I don't have to stop and turn around repeatedly, and I end up choosing to walk around the one with the grass island, so I wouldn't disturb anyone who wanted to hang out by the fountain. Some people can be a bit unnerved by this type of pacing, and I was worried I might freak out a stranger who saw me on a late-night walk. There was the occasional passerby, but for the most part the place was completely empty at this time of night. I figured I could go in circles for a while without disturbing anyone. So I put my headphones in. I started to walk in my circles with my music playing as my mind drifted off. I don't know how long I had been pacing before the encounter, but I know it wasn't for very long at all. As I was rounding the bend once more, I was met suddenly by headlights from a car driving slowly up the path to this roundabout. I was very confused by this, as I was sure this path was meant for pedestrian traffic only, but since it was deserted, save for me, I assumed that maybe the driver just needed an easy way to turn around, and didn't think it would be that big a deal since the risk of accidentally hitting someone was next to zero. The vehicle passed me by while I moved closer to the center to keep from being in the way, and I kept my eyes on it while I walked. I expected the car to just go around and back down the path it had come from, since that was the only path on the roundabout that led back to the street. But instead, it came to a stop on the side of the roundabout opposite the street. While I initially started to assume that maybe they needed to look at their GPS or make a phone call before continuing, there was no denying the uneasy feeling I was starting to get. Instead of continuing my round route, which would have taken me right alongside the vehicle, I decided to take one of the paths toward the building and just wait for them to move on. While I walked, I noticed an empty parking lot on the other side. The path didn't go there, but it was an easy walk over the grass patch dividing the two areas. I started to pace in the lot for a bit, and quickly forgot about returning to the roundabout, as I had gotten lost in my thoughts once again. I was pulled back into reality, though, by the shine of semi-distant headlights. It was the same car from before, or at least I thought it looked eerily similar. Luckily, I was facing the entrance to the lot as it turned in, and said entrance was a decent distance away from me. I started to hear quiet alarm bells in the back of my mind, even as my rational side tried to assume that it must be a different car, an odd coincidence, and perhaps I was just being paranoid. Regardless of this mental attempt to explain it away, I felt it was better to be safe than sorry. I ended up walking around the other side of the building to get back to the little roundabout I was at before. I took a breath and calmed my nerves a little, with some half-hearted reassurances, before walking on the roundabout once again. This time I didn't turn my music back on, but kept my headphones in. They weren't noise-canceling at all, so I could hear directly through them when the music was paused. I kept pacing like I had been, but this time I was very much focused and aware of what was going on around me. I thought that once maybe 10 or 15 minutes had gone by without incident, I'd be able to calm down and get the last of this done. Barely 5 minutes had passed when I heard the obvious sound of rubber tires coming up the path once again. This time when I looked, I was certain it was the same car, and that it had followed me back here from the lot. I didn't know what the driver wanted with me. They never honked, rolled down windows, or anything to try and get my attention. but I realized at that point that as a 19-year-old girl alone at night in a more secluded area of the campus, I'd been extremely lucky so far, and the luck wouldn't last forever. This time I speed walked through the grass. There's a pedestrian-only arch-like bridge that goes over a very busy major street that runs through campus, and while I normally hated this bridge because of how steep it was closer than the nearest street crossing right then, and I didn't have to wait to cross it. I felt much more at ease when I reached the top of it, and once I got there, I turned around and saw the car drive off, seemingly into the night. I walked back to my dorm, and by the time I reached my door, the adrenaline had worn off and I was just exhausted. I went in quietly as to not wake my roommate. I laid in bed without even changing into pajamas and fell right asleep. I never contacted campus police about the matter or anything because I didn't have any helpful information, other than it was a 4-door car that could have been either black or dark blue for all I know. It didn't seem like I'd be believed anyway. I never saw that vehicle again, nor heard anything related to it in any way, so over time it just slipped my mind altogether. I still don't know what the driver had planned or why they didn't just get out of the car and come after me on foot at any point. Maybe it was the first time they were trying this and they were nervous. Whatever it was, I'm glad I didn't have to find out the hard way, and I never paced in public areas after dark on that campus again. Several years ago when I was 25, I lived with, at the time, one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely ever home. This night, however, she ended up staying at our place and heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late usually, watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact that my neighbors tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give you some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple living in a smaller mill house. They were constantly coming to our door and asking for handouts. Normally, I'd be very happy to help a neighbor out, but they would come over and ask for crazy shit, like for us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs got shut off, beer, and once to literally just ask for $1. They would consistently be knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door peephole to see if they could spot us. What the hell? Anyway, there I was, smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch, when I heard a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who had come a-knockin'. It was 11 p.m., by the way. I checked the peephole, and sure enough, the boyfriend was out there on my porch. Normally, I'd just walk away and continue on with my life, but he looked like he was in extreme distress. I opened the door to see what was up. "Hey, I just wanted to come over here and see if you would film my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring here in my pocket, and I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me." Baffled but curious, I told him congrats and said that I'd be out in a second. I just needed to put some shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. I quickly ran to the back room that looked out into their backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No sign of decorations or anything like that. Naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Yeah, fuck that," she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend started banging on it. I looked through the peephole again. I couldn't see anything, and was confused all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the peephole. I quickly turned around and put my back up against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto the hangers and sat against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to be sure we weren't just overreacting. We went to our back door and hopped into her car so we could do a drive-by. They always had their front door open, and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see inside their house. Slowly, we crept by in her car and peered into the living room. Sitting on the couch and staring at the wall, They looked strung out. It was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at a friend's house that night. I had never answered the door to either of them again. One day I came home from work and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me as I got out of my car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her I hadn't seen them for a long time, and she informed me she was the owner. She told me they were months behind on rent, and finally she'd come to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed, needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall and literal shit all over the floor. I told her I was sorry to hear she had to deal with all of that, but I was happy they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad I didn't follow him to that backyard.